I find I know, a little bit of every other character's background. I really don't know mine or Sweet Peas or Fangs. So between our little gang, I would love to know more about
Mhm.
like what happened to my parents. Do I have siblings? I have my story like made up in my head.
Mhm.
So I'm just like waiting to see it on the paper if that's reality of what I think Tony's life is.
It's June 1st, 2020. We're trapped indoors. I'm in the middle of the Chloe Ting ab workout, having just returned after turning my rest day into a rest week. And boom, I get a new notification. New BuzzFeed article just dropped. Because I don't have a Twitter, so this is how I get my information. Oh my gosh. Riverdale fandom in shambles. Vanessa Morgan, series regular, 3 seasons deep at this point, had posted a series of tweets calling out her own show. She mentioned she was tired of watching black characters be reduced to one dimensional sidekicks for their white counterparts. She mentioned how she was the only black series regular on Riverdale at the time, and she mentioned how she was being paid the least of all the other series regulars. She said it plainly, she said it publicly, she said it all while still under contract. And if you were in the fandom in 2020, you might remember your timeline having a little moment because we all knew she wasn't wrong. We had been watching it happen in real time, season after season. Nobody behind the camera seemed to notice, or if they did, they just didn't care. This is the story of how we got there. The key thing you need to know for Tony's introduction is that the town of Riverdale is divided between the north side, nice part of town where 4 main characters live, and the south side, run by a gang called the Southside Serpents. At the end of season 1, Jughead ends up in the foster care and has to transfer to Southside High, which is where we meet our girl, Toni Topaz. Toni Topaz is a character from the comics, first appearing in 2012, so a newer edition. She's friends with Jughead, strongly coded as bisexual, and almost always depicted with pink hair and a biker jacket. When Vanessa Morgan was announced as being cast in July 2017, showrunner Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa described Toni as vivacious and as a disruptor. He said that she'd be a confidant to Jughead and that they explore her bisexuality. He also warned that she might even create some friction within the very popular Betty and Jughead relationship. And if you were in the fandom at this time, you know that threatening Bughead was a death sentence. But overall, this sounded exciting and it sounded like Toni was going to matter. So let's talk about what actually happened. So we first see Toni in season 2, episode 3. Jughead walks through the metal detectors at Southside High, because of course the school would have metal detectors, and Toni Topaz is waiting on the other side to give him a tour. They connect immediately through their shared dry humor, and she maps out the cafeteria factions. She reveals herself to be a serpent and warns Jughead that he'll be targeted if he stays isolated, since he's such a loner. Later in the same episode, she joins the school newspaper as a photographer, so we learn that's one of her interests. And we also see she and Jughead have a very easy chemistry. She later walks in on him kissing Betty, and there's this charged, awkward moment, which the show is clearly setting up for later tension. She warns him one more time about isolating himself, and he doesn't listen and gets beaten up by a rival gang. We end the episode with Jughead sitting with the serpents. As introductions go, it's genuinely pretty solid. I mean, one episode in and we already know that she's a serpent with real credibility inside the gang, she's a photographer, she's fiercely loyal to anyone with a serpent jacket or serpent blood, she has a dry wit, and she has romantic potential with a male lead. So definitely a character with potential and a character with room to grow. And for a stretch, season 2 actually follows through on this. I mean, in 204, she's helping crack a serial killer cipher. It turns out she reads a lot and knows way too much about true crime and serial killers. In 205, she's the rational voice when the younger serpents want to blow up a building, because she understands what the community actually needs, and she's the one who pushes Jughead to officially join a gang and step up as a leader, similar to his father. Then there's the brief romantic moment with Jughead, which she shuts down immediately in 206. She says it's because she doesn't want to be a rebound and because she's more into girls anyway. So the show confirms her bisexuality, drops the potential tug-out relationship, and introduces her to Cheryl Blossom all in the same episode. Coincidence? I think not. I remember an interesting take that I once heard where they said that they believed Toni was intentionally trying to be seductive and pretending to like Jughead only to bring him closer to the serpents. And this was kind of highlighted by the fact that as soon as he joins, she seemingly loses all romantic interest in him, which would show how manipulative and calculated she could be. And I honestly kind of really like this take because it really doesn't make sense otherwise why they dropped the Tughead relationship that fast. But of course, Riverdale doesn't actually follow up on this. And then 211, which is one of the best episodes for Toni because we learned her grandfather is the oldest living serpent and a founding member. Because the serpents were originally formed from survivors of the Uktena tribe after General Pickens, the founder of Riverdale, massacred their people. So the serpents are her family's legacy. Jughead interviews him for a school assignment, then writes a piece that frames Uktena as helpless victims. And Toni calls him out for this, rightfully so, because she tells him that he's using her grandfather as a prop in his personal vendetta against the North Side. And he only really started caring about these injustices when they started affecting him, but her family has been dealing with this for generations. This episode gives her a real moral authority and a really rich personal history. I mean, it's like the fullest we ever see her in these early seasons, and then the second half of season 2 begins. 214 marks the beginning of a shift within Toni's character, and not coincidentally, this is also unofficially the beginning of the Choni relationship. The episode begins when Toni overhears a phone call with Cheryl and Jughead, where Cheryl shares information in order to cause tension between Jughead, Betty, and the Core 4 group overall. Toni asks her about it, like, why would you do this, but slips in how she senses Cheryl is in a lot of pain, which of course causes Cheryl to storm off. Then later, they run into each other again at the movie theater and sit together while they conveniently watch Love, Simon. Love, Simon being the story of a teenage boy who struggles to come out. After the movie, Cheryl and Toni talk, where Cheryl reveals that she once had a female lover, but when her mom walked in on her, she shamed her and called her a deviant, which is when Toni turns to her and says, "You're not loveless. You're not deviant. You're sensational." I say we start to notice, maybe not red flags, but a slight pink flag, because we see Toni's character start to become someone whose only purpose is to support Cheryl. Now, I give the writer some grace because there wasn't a serpent plot this episode, and the core 4 were off in this secluded cabin, and the episode was meant to give other characters like Kevin, Josie, and Cheryl time to shine. However, my only real gripe is a conversation that Toni and Cheryl have at the end. It really was just a moment for Cheryl to talk about the struggles she faced growing up, not being accepted for who she is, and Toni just affirming her. But what the writers could have done was just give Toni a line. Literally a single line, which she could have slipped in a similar struggle she also had when it came to coming to terms with her own sexuality. We learn next season that her family was initially thrilled about her dating girls, so maybe she could have said something to that effect here and have related to Cheryl in that moment, which still serves the ultimate purpose of the scene of Cheryl feeling supported and the audience learning about Cheryl's sexuality, and also laying the groundwork for something to happen, but it just allows Toni to be seen as more of an equal in this scene. But the remaining episodes are stirred up red flags, because in 215, Toni spends the entire episode just emotionally supporting Cheryl at her father's will reading. 216, Toni joins the cheerleading squad just so Cheryl can spend more time with her. I also just need you to pause and imagine episode 3 Toni cheerleading, right? 217, Cheryl goes missing, so Toni spends the episode just trying to find her. They do share their first kiss, which I must admit is cute, cannot lie. And then 218 is just Toni giving Cheryl a pep talk. And by the season finale, Cheryl is officially a serpent. Yay! Meaning that the one space that was entirely Toni's now includes Cheryl too. So, what does season 2 tell us? Well, season 2 is interesting because it does give the audience a glimpse into what's in store for Toni. And that's only Cheryl. I mean, at the beginning of the season, we see her hang with the serpents, and we see a lot of potential there with exploring the inner gang dynamics and the war with the North Side. But nope, she soon enters the relationship with Cheryl, and then we barely see her with the serpents. And again, it's not meant for something more interesting, but instead it's just to be Cheryl's sole support system, which halts any of her own development in the process. And unfortunately, this doesn't change for a while. 301, we learn that Toni and Cheryl spent the entire summer traveling together. Toni doesn't speak in the one big scene she appears in, when the serpents go to rescue their dog Hot Dog, but hey, Cheryl does, and plays a pretty pivotal role in fact. So, super cool. In 303, we see Toni turn into literal furniture as Cheryl uses her as a chair while she's talking to Veronica. I say she serves as furniture not only because Cheryl is sitting on her, but because she doesn't have a single line in this scene either. We do later see Toni taking pics of Cheryl, so hey, throwback to her photography interest. And she, along with Cheryl, of course, are tasked with breaking into and taking pictures of a Jingle Jangle lab to get proof of its existence. No, I will not be explaining that. In 308, all the vixens have seizures, and this gives Cheryl a reason to take Toni home and nurse her back to health. And since, hey, they're already together and Cheryl has her there, she uses the opportunity to ask Toni to move in because clearly they don't spend enough time together. And then we get to 309. Sigh. Okay, so for reasons that are never explained, Cheryl and Toni are now cat burglars. We don't see their cat burglary before this episode or after this episode, but today, hey, I guess this is their thing. Cheryl is already rich, so she doesn't need the money. Toni isn't rich, but there is no inclination that she needs money or would resort to stealing if she did. So why do they do it? Is it just a thrill? Is it just to stick it to the man? I don't know, because their reasoning is never explained. Jughead, at this time, is now Serpent King, and he declares the Serpents adopt a zero-tolerance policy. So there's a zero tolerance for dealing drugs, doing drugs, and zero tolerance for crime of any kind. Now, this is very clearly stated in front of all the Serpents, including Toni and Cheryl, and he is very serious about it. So what do Cheryl and Toni do? Well, immediately commit another crime, of course, by breaking into Hiram Lodge's house. But not only that, Cheryl leaves her signature mark at the scene so she can be easily identified. Toni is just there the entire time, never objects, happily goes with it. So no one could have ever predicted what happens next. Well, Jughead kicks them both out of the Serpents, because duh. And during the confrontation, Toni is standing behind Cheryl, silent. She mentions once that she's Serpent Legacy, then she kind of goes back to being silent. Cheryl is the one who argues with Jughead, and Toni is just there. And that's, it. Toni, whose grandfather was a founding member of the Serpents, the community that took her in, her family's legacy, is just expelled from the gang. And she doesn't fight for it, she just follows Cheryl out and we move on. And the thing is, this could have been a moment that caused a little rift in their relationship, where maybe Cheryl is still a cat burglar, just for the thrill or to combat authority, and she gets kicked out of the Serpents. Then when Cheryl gets banished, she asks Toni to leave with her, but Toni says no. Because remember, the Serpents are her family, are her legacy. And while it would make sense for the character, it would also allow the writers to prove that Toni is a character that has values and things that she cares about, and that she's willing to make sacrifices of her own volition. But nope, she just gives up to Serpents. Running through the rest of season 3, 311 Toni tells Betty to back off because she upset Cheryl. That's her one scene. 312 Toni finally gets a real moment. She confronts Cheryl after Cheryl outs a fellow student and mentions how her uncle hated how she dated girls, and that the Serpents were the family that she accepted her without judgment, and now she doesn't have them. Now, we know this is because of Cheryl, but I digress. This episode is about Cheryl making amends with multiple people because Cheryl is allowed to have relationships with other characters. And this episode ends with Cheryl giving Toni an all-women gang, which they call the Pretty Poisons. This is sweet, except Toni now leads a gang that meets at Cheryl's house, uses Cheryl's pool, and eats Cheryl's food, which Cheryl can use as leverage later, and spoiler alert, she does. Oh, and we also learned that Toni has a perfect SAT score. In 313, Jughead talks to Toni 101, and he asks her to rejoin the Serpents because all the female members are leaving to join the Pretty Poisons. Toni says she'll come back if she can be Serpent Queen, so this is the first time she has explicitly said that she wants to lead, and it's good. Cheryl then separately takes the Pretty Poisons to jump Sweet Pea and Fangs. Toni gets upset, she tells Cheryl, hey, this gang is mine, you run ideas by me first. This is where Cheryl throws it back in Toni's face that you're eating my food in my house, yada yada. But regardless, this is the most authority that Toni has had all season. And 314 echoes this. Toni holds her ground again when Cheryl starts another fight. And then we hit 315, which walks it back immediately. Cheryl sees Toni singing with Veronica and gets jealous. There's a blow up, they have sex, they talk, and then Toni actually says out loud what we've all, or at least I, have been seeing. That she's suffocated because she's in Cheryl's space and she has no room of her own. Cheryl gets offended and tells her to move out, and they break up. And in case this wasn't clear, I was not upset by this at all, because it felt like the writers possibly becoming self-aware of Toni's lack of agency. Toni's whole storyline this season has been focused on her relationship with Cheryl. So at this point, I'm excited to see what they do with Toni now that her and Cheryl are no longer together. Oh, what's that? They get back together in the next episode? 318 through 320, Cheryl joins a cult, and Toni seemingly works with Betty to infiltrate it to save her, which is great, she's interacting with another character and she's involved in the main plot. But then, no, of course, in 319, it's actually revealed that she's just in the cult for real, because having Toni genuinely work with, Betty or just someone who's not Cheryl on the season's main conflict is just too much plot for her to carry. So she gets absorbed into whatever Cheryl got going on. At the end of 321, we have learned that the cult is organ harvesting con. No, we'll not be explaining that. And right before Toni's procedure, we see Cheryl sacrifice herself to allow Toni to escape. So now, the moment we've all been waiting for. It's up to Toni, of all people, to save Cheryl and the rest of the cult. It's 322, the season finale. We see Toni running through the forest and running to Penelope, Cheryl's mom, to tell her what's going on. Penelope is on top of it, and we call the rest of the Core 4, and Toni gets to take charge in leading this rescue operation. Just kidding. Of course not. I love teasing you guys. No, Penelope just drugs Toni, and she's out for like half the episode, and by the time she wakes up, Cheryl saved herself. So, amazing. Like, you really can't make this stuff up. So yeah, season 3. Great season for Toni. 401 is actually a very beautiful tribute episode for Luke Perry, who was the actor who played Archie's father, who passed away in real life. It was actually a really beautiful episode, surprisingly really well done, especially for a show like Riverdale. And then we get to 402, which is very exciting because it's where Cheryl gets to really go at it with this new principal. And Toni gets to show off her new gigantic headband. No lines, just serving face, serving headband. In 403, Toni finds a dead body in the chapel of the Blossom estate, and we learn Cheryl has been hiding her dead brother's preserved corpse. No, not explaining that. And Toni discovers this and is rightfully horrified. And then she just stays in the house with the corpse for multiple episodes in a row. 404 is the Halloween episode, and Toni asks Cheryl to get rid of Jason's body. Cheryl spends the entire episode gaslighting her into believing Jason's spirit will haunt them if the body is moved, and then it turns out the house is actually haunted, and Toni, once again, doesn't move out. 406, there is an evil doll now, and Toni accepts this. And she also kills the man, Cheryl's uncle, in fact. And this should, have some maybe consequences for her, some guilt, some trauma, some kind of, interior response. Nope. 408 is the therapy episode where characters each get a session to discuss their trauma. And you know who has a lot of recent trauma? Maybe someone who just murdered a man. But of course, Toni does not get a session, but she does get to wish Cheryl good luck before Cheryl goes in for hers. In 411, she's on the school quiz bowl team. Sure, hey, it's something new, so I won't complain. Remember, she has the perfect SAT score. And then we get to 412, which is the first episode all season where Toni is involved in a plot that has nothing to do with Cheryl. She finds out that Fangs has a side hustle and wants in. The side hustle is a tickling business. No, not explaining that. But the point is, it's hers, and it's separate. It is really weird and disturbing, but at least it doesn't involve Cheryl at all. Oh wait, who was that? Was that Nick St. Clair? The individual who attempted to assault Cheryl back in season 2? Oh, so then this whole plot, the only individual plot Toni has had in 1.5 seasons that didn't involve Cheryl, now turns into a revenge storyline for Cheryl? Of course. They do tell us that Toni was assaulted before she moved to Riverdale, so I guess that's something new we learned. But also, what do you mean before she moved to Riverdale? Isn't her family, native to the land? Where could she have possibly been before this? Anyway, she doesn't really do anything for the remaining of the season 4 episodes until we get to season 4, episode 18, which is truly the first time Toni is involved in a plot that doesn't involve Cheryl in any capacity. We're brought back to the tickling plotline, boo, We do have Toni and Reggie interact, so yay. She recruits the Vixens to help with this tick operation, and yeah, she's in like 2 whole scenes without Cheryl. I would love to say that she doesn't mention Cheryl in either of these scenes, but she does. Only briefly though. And yeah, the last scene for her is with Cheryl as they watch a tape of some recreation of Jason's murder. So creepy. And that's the end of season 4. So across seasons 3 and 4, here is a complete list of things we learn about Toni that have nothing to do with Cheryl. She misses the Serpents. We get that one scene. She has a perfect SAT score. Also mentioned once, never referenced again. Her uncle didn't accept her dating girls. And she was assaulted before moving to Riverdale. Again, kind of mentioned in passing. Doesn't really amount to much, which we do learn in season 4. So that's it. That is 2 seasons of development for a series regular. So now I feel like it's appropriate to mention the Black best friend trope. And I'll be using the definition from tvtropes.com because that feels appropriate. And they define this as a Black character whose role either A, revolves almost entirely around a white character, or B, serves as a conscious effort for a white character / writer to appear inclusive. And we definitely fall into A, but low-key maybe B a little bit as well. Because the character, in quotes, Toni, does not act. She's reacting to Cheryl. She doesn't want things except in relation to Cheryl. She has no interiority that exists independently of her girlfriend. I remember Friendly Space Ninja in one of his Riverdale videos referred to Toni as Cheryl's pet. And yes, this is exactly what it is. Toni has no agency, she just follows Cheryl around aimlessly. And Cheryl, meanwhile, has drama with her family, with the principal, with the cheer team, with a literal cult. Cheryl gets to exist outside the relationship, but Toni does not. I know there's going to be some pushback to me saying that because Toni's a supporting character and this is just how it goes. And technically, yes, she's not part of the core 4 or 5, but Reggie is a character that's of the same level of importance as her because they're roughly around the same call sheet number. And in season 3, Reggie is also in a relationship with a main character, Veronica. So Reggie is paired with a lead and similar status level, but here's the difference. While dating Veronica, Reggie also helps run the business operations at the Speakeasy. He also has a separate storyline about his relationship with his father. He helps break Archie out of prison. He works with Kevin and Josie on a mystery. He's still on the football team and gets to interact with the football players. So Reggie, while in a relationship with a main character, still has a life outside of it. So why can't Toni? And there is no good answer. There's only the pattern. And the pattern is 2 years old by the time we get to season 4, which is when Vanessa Morgan speaks up. So in early 2020, Vanessa Morgan posted a series of tweets calling out Riverdale directly. She named the pay disparity, she named the sidekick dynamics, and she named the exhaustion of watching Black characters be reduced to supporting functions for white character storylines. And the response from the fandom was pretty immediate because it's undeniable. Every single person who had been watching the show could see it. And the crazy part is this isn't, completely unheard of for actors to feel like they have to speak out about the mistreatment of their characters on their respective shows. Matter of fact, it's not even unheard of for Black actresses on the CW in 2020 to speak out because about 2 weeks after Vanessa's tweet shook up the Riverdale fandom, the Charmed fandom was experiencing something similar. In 2018, the CW rebooted the beloved series Charmed, but to break away from the norm of Hollywood typically only casting white women to play witches, all 3 sisters are women of color, and the show promised to highlight that and celebrate the fact that they have these 3 women of color front and center. Well, that's until they said, actually, so we have this white man here, and let's also introduce this white woman, and yeah, I don't know, these 2 just feel like the most important characters, and we need to focus solely on them. And Madeline Mantock, who plays the eldest sister Macy Vaughn, also the best sister, no shade, and who never shies away from talking about the importance of representation, wasn't down with that. So she rightfully called out the show for this. Now, while the fandom loved Madeline for calling this out, as it was also impossible to ignore, instead of realizing, wow, we are really centering these white characters in a show we told everyone was focused on these 3 women of color, and correcting course, they decided to punish Madeline for criticizing them by continuing to screw over her character. And Madeline actually ended up leaving the show after the 3rd season. Now, for Vanessa, she luckily had a much better response from the crew, where showrunner and known TV show killer Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa publicly acknowledged Vanessa's criticism. He said he had failed one of his actors, and he said that real change was needed. But words are easy. The question is whether anything actually changed on screen. Because of COVID shutting down production towards the end of Season 4, the final 3 episodes of Season 4 are actually the first 3 episodes of Season 5. And from the very first episode back, something is noticeably different. 501. Right away, we see Cheryl ask Toni a question. Toni gets the answer with something about herself. She wants to be Serpent Queen. Then we see Toni at her grandmother's house, one-on-one, without Cheryl or anyone else in the room. We learn her grandmother doesn't care that she dates women, but she does care that she's dating a Blossom whose family orchestrated the Uktena massacre. So we're finally getting something that connects back to that episode in Season 2, which, was pretty important to the formation of the show's, town, and pretty important to Toni's character. And then, crazy, we see Toni make a decision for herself. Her grandmother asks her to come home after prom instead of staying with Cheryl, and she does. She chooses her family. She chooses herself. 502, Toni doesn't really do much, but again, that's fine. I don't think anyone was asking for her to have an A plot every episode since she is a supporting character. Still a series regular, but ultimately a supporting character. So this is completely fine and normal. It's just when it's every single episode when it's a problem. And then we get to 503, which is the graduation episode. We see Toni and Cheryl opening up a time capsule from the first class of Riverdale High from 75 years ago. And this, in and of itself, is an improvement because we see Cheryl and Toni taking turns grabbing something and saying what it is. Typically, they would have Toni stand in the crowd as Cheryl opens it, or have her just hold the box open for Cheryl and just not say anything. We then see her in the next scene where they all go over the yearbook, and hey, the pretty poisons get a mention. Crazy how everyone, all the students and faculty, are just okay with having active gang members gathering in the school and just featuring them in the yearbook. But whatever. We then get to see Toni's grandmother again as Toni gives her a tour of the school and her locker. We see Toni and her grandmother have a moment, and then we see Cheryl, who actually decides to walk away and not interrupt. We also see Toni talk to Fangs and Sweet Pea because, remember, they're friends. The last scene we see is Toni and Cheryl talking about their relationship. We learn that Toni's going to college and Cheryl's decide not to so she can try to restore the Blossom name. They also decide to split ways so that they can live full lives. So in the 3 episodes, we learn more about Toni than we did in 2 full seasons combined. I of course can't say for sure whether that's a rewrite prompted by the tweet, or maybe it was always planned material that finally made it to air, or, I don't know, something the pandemic break just gave the writer space to reconsider. But considering the patterns we picked up before, and how far these past 3 episodes strayed from the norm, yeah, Vanessa got they asses. Season 5 jumps 7 years forward, and this is where things genuinely start working for Toni. Post-time jump, Toni has graduated college, we learn she studied social work, came back to Riverdale, revived the Serpents, and is now the guidance counselor at Riverdale High. She's the first person Archie sees when he returns, she gives him a tour of the changed town, and she leads the charge against Riverdale's unincorporation. She comes up with the plan to convert the high school to private so that the core 4 can become teachers. And none of this feels manufactured. Of course she came back to revive the Serpents, her grandfather was a founding member. Of course she studied social work, she grew up in a gang and has lived experience she wanted to turn into something useful. Of course, it made sense for Archie to run into her. The White Worm's at the bottom of Pop's Diner, which is the main hangout spot. And plus, we all know, Toni loves giving tours. So it all makes sense for this specific character with this specific history. This is the Toni from Season 2, Episode 3. This is who she was always supposed to be. Season 6 keeps the momentum. Toni's on the town council, she's running the Serpents, she has her own storyline with Fangs and Kevin about co-parenting their child. When the season's villain, Percival Pickens, specifically targets her to get her removed from the council, it's because she has real power worth taking. She is fully established as a character who exists in this world, rather just in someone else's orbit. Season 7 is a full universe reset back to 1955 after there was this comet coming to destroy Riverdale. So Cheryl had to use her Scarlet Witch powers to try to stop it, and we're not clear if it worked or not. Anyways, Archie wakes up and it's 1955. No, not explaining that. And honestly, season 7 may be Toni's best season. Also, hot take possibly. I actually really like season 7. Sue me. But yeah, the stakes for her character are existential in a way that they never really were before. Because it's 1955, and you can't be queer, you can't be black, and you can't be a woman. So God forbid you're a queer black woman. We do see Toni and Cheryl falling in love again, but this time there's some real weight there. And more importantly, this time, Toni exists outside of it. She joins the Vixens for Cheryl, and then she quits because she realizes she doesn't have to do things just because Cheryl wants her to. She also has her own friend Lizzo, who exists entirely in her orbit and interacts with no other characters. She essentially has her own supporting character, if you will. So the big question, did they fix it? Did they make true to their promise to Vanessa Morgan and the fans of Riverdale to do better? Honestly, yes. The changes in season 5 through 7 are real, and they're real correction, but not an overcorrection. Because Toni doesn't become the main character. The core 4 are still the core 4. I know I mentioned there's a lot that she does, but it's still very much the Archie, Betty, Jughead, Veronica show. She's still a supporting character, but just a supporting character who has her own story and her own relationships. She occupies space because she's earned it, not because she just happens to be standing next to someone who has. But I just can't let go of the fact that it literally took Vanessa Morgan calling them out to get here. She had to call out her own show while still under contract to it and accept whatever professional risk that carried. She could have been labeled difficult, she could have been fired, she could have been blacklisted. And compare that to Madeline Mantalk. Same situation, same year, same network. One actress got accountability, but one got pushed out. The difference was not who was right, because they both were right. The difference was who was in charge and what they decided to value. Vanessa was lucky, in the way that no actress should have to be lucky, that her showrunner was willing to be held accountable. So, do I forgive season 3 and 4? No. The writing during that period was lazy at best and genuinely offensive at worst. A black woman's character was reduced to a prop for another character's story for seasons, by people who had enough information to know what was happening but just didn't act on it. But the correction was real, and real accountability matters even when it's late. I also want to be careful here because I'm not saying that the writers are racist. Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa is a man of color himself, and I don't think anyone in our writer's room woke up and decided to deliberately sideline their only black series regular. I genuinely don't. But here's the thing about bias. It doesn't require intent to cause harm. When you spend 3 seasons making your only black series regular invisible, when her wants don't matter, when her history is only relevant when it serves someone else's story, when she exists primarily to support and affirm a white character, what are you saying? Even if it's unconscious, even if nobody planned it, what does that communicate about whose stories you think are worth telling? About who you see as a full person and who you see as a supporting function? That's the question I want to leave you with. Not, are the Riverdale writers bad people, but what do our blind spots reveal? Because the writers who did this to Toni aren't uniquely villainous. This pattern exists across television, across film, across the entire industry. And it keeps existing because it keeps going unexamined, until people like Vanessa and Madeline refuse to let it. The fact that it took a public call-out, multiple seasons deep, for anyone to course correct says something. Not just about Riverdale, but about which stories this industry treats as worth protecting from the start. Riverdale figured it out eventually. Just, I don't know, maybe don't make your black actress tweet about it first. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know there's a little bit of a longer one, so I really appreciate you all who stuck it out to the end. This video is very near and dear to my heart because, believe it or not, I originally wrote a first draft of the script back in 2022. And I told myself that when I finally got the courage to create a YouTube channel, that this would be my first video essay. So I mean, it was not the first. I've done a few since starting earlier this year, but it's fine. But anyways, as the kids say, please share, like, subscribe, and also let me know in the comments, what were your thoughts on Toni Topaz? Were you someone who was enraged by her lack of development and screen time, or maybe were you someone who didn't even notice because so much else was going on in the show? And with that, I'll see y'all on the next one with a video about Santana Lopez, so stay tuned for that.